Everyone walked past him bleeding on the sidewalk, except a little girl who spent her last $5 to save his life. She didn't know the man watching from across the street was the most feared mafia boss in the city, or that helping his son would put her entire family in danger. 3 days later, black cars surrounded her home, and what happened next stunned everyone. If this story pulled you in, go ahead and subscribe so you never miss what's ahead. I've got another unforgettable story coming tomorrow. And while you're here, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing people tuned in from all over the world. Okay, let's get back into it. Lillian Bailey knelt on a cold city street at dawn, her small hands shaking around a plastic bottle of water and a packet of pills, her last $5, the only thing standing between her and going hungry tonight. Just feet away, a young man with blood on his knuckles and terror in his eyes struggled to breathe. His face had gone pale. He was collapsing right there on the wet pavement, and everyone else just kept walking. "Get away from him," a woman hissed, pulling her child closer. "Those people are nothing but trouble." Lillian looked at the dying stranger, then down at the crumpled $5 bill she'd already spent. She thought about her mother coming home exhausted, asking what they'd eat for dinner, but she couldn't just walk away. She'd already made her choice. What Lillian didn't know, what no 9-year-old girl in a worn olive green jacket could possibly know, was that the man she'd just saved was Arthur Hermans, son of the most feared mafia boss in the city. And 3 days later, black cars would line her entire street. But let me take you back to the morning before that street corner, before everything changed. Lillian's mornings always started before sunrise. Not because she wanted them to, but because her mother's shift at the downtown office building ended at 5:45 a.m., and Lillian had learned not to sleep soundly until she heard the apartment door unlock. Their place was small, 3rd floor of a building where the heat only worked half the time, and the hallway smelled like old carpet and someone else's cooking. 2 rooms, 1 window that looked out at the brick wall of the building next door, but it was theirs. Lillian sat on the couch in the dark that morning, wrapped in the blanket they shared, watching the door. When it finally opened, her mother came in moving like someone twice her age, shoulders bent, eyes half closed, work shoes in one hand. "You're supposed to be asleep, baby. I was waiting for you." Her mother smiled that tired smile, the one that meant "I love you, but I'm too exhausted to say it out loud," and dropped onto the couch beside her. "Did we get paid yet?" Lillian asked quietly. Her mother's silence was the answer. Lillian looked at the kitchen. She knew what was in there without checking. Half a loaf of bread, some peanut butter, maybe eggs if they were lucky. $5 could mean dinner tomorrow, or bus fare, or the start of next week's groceries if they stretched it. $5 was everything. Her mother kissed the top of her head. "Get some sleep. I'll make breakfast in a bit." But Lillian had already seen the exhaustion in her mother's face, the way her hands trembled slightly as she set down her bag. She'd been awake for 23 hours straight. "I can get breakfast," Lillian said. "I'll go to the corner store." Her mother hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. The last one. "Just get bread and milk, nothing else." Lillian took the bill carefully, like it was made of glass. "I will." She pulled on her jacket, the olive green one that was too thin for February but the only one she had, and stepped out into the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere below, a door slammed. Outside, the neighborhood was just beginning to wake up. Streetlights still glowed yellow against the gray dawn. The corner store was 3 blocks away, past the closed laundromat and the boarded-up barbershop and the alley where Lillian had learned never to look too closely. The cold bit at her face. She shoved her hands deeper into her pockets, feeling the $5 bill crinkle between her fingers. The corner store was run by Mr. Park, an older Korean man who never smiled but always let Lillian count out her change twice to make sure she got it right. The bell above the door chimed as she walked in. "Morning," she said quietly. Mr. Park nodded from behind the counter, not looking up from his newspaper. Lillian walked the familiar route. Bread aisle, dairy case, checkout. She set the items on the counter and handed over the $5 bill. Mr. Park rang her up. $4.62. She took the change carefully, 38 cents, and slipped it into her pocket. Her mother would want to know exactly what was left. The bag felt light in her hand as she pushed back out into the cold. That's when she saw him. A young man slumped on the curb just past the store, his back against a lamppost, dark hoodie, jeans torn at the knee. One hand pressed against his ribs like he was trying to hold something inside. Lillian slowed her steps. His face was bruised, deep purple spreading across his left cheekbone. His knuckles were scraped raw and bleeding. His breathing came in short, painful gasps. People walked past him. A woman with a stroller, 2 men in work boots. Nobody stopped. Nobody even looked. Lillian stood there, the grocery bag dangling from her hand, and watched the young man's chest rise and fall in shallow, desperate movements. She thought about her mother's words. Just get bread and milk, nothing else. She thought about the 38 cents in her pocket. She thought about how the young man's lips had started to turn gray. Then she turned around and walked back into the corner store. Mr. Park looked up, surprised. Forget something? Lillian set the bread and milk on the counter. I need to return these. Mr. Park's eyebrows rose. Return? Please. Her voice was barely a whisper. I need different things. Something in her face must have convinced him. He processed the return without asking questions, and Lillian took the $5 bill back with trembling hands. She walked to the medicine aisle, grabbed a small bottle of water from the cooler, then a packet of painkillers, the cheapest ones, the generic brand in the white box. At the counter, Mr. Park rang her up slowly. You sure about this? Lillian nodded. $4.75. She handed over the 5, took her quarter, and walked back outside. The young man was still there, now slumped further down, his eyes barely open. Lillian knelt beside him on the cold, wet pavement. Hey, she said softly. Can you hear me? His eyes focused on her slowly, confused. She twisted open the water bottle and held it out. You need to drink this. He didn't move. Please, Lillian said. You're hurt. His hand shook as he reached for the bottle. Lillian helped him guide it to his lips. He drank in small, painful sips. She tore open the painkiller packet and shook 2 pills into her palm. Take these. That's when she heard the footsteps. Heavy, purposeful, getting closer. Lillian looked up. A man in a black suit was walking toward them from the end of the street, his stride fast and controlled. No tie, dark hair, and on his hands, visible even from this distance, tattoos that crawled up past his wrists. His face was hard, unreadable, dangerous. The young man beside her went rigid. No, he whispered. Not here, not now. But the man in the black suit didn't stop walking. And Lillian Bailey, 9 years old with an empty grocery bag and 38 cents to her name, stayed exactly where she was. Lillian Bailey had learned to count in dollars and cents before she learned to read chapter books. Not because her mother sat her down with math worksheets or flashcards, but because survival had its own curriculum. By the time Lillian turned 6, she knew that $1.29 could buy a loaf of day-old bread. That $2.50 meant a carton of eggs. That $3.47 was the difference between eating dinner and pretending you weren't hungry. Her mother never wanted her to learn these lessons, but poverty doesn't ask permission before it teaches. Their apartment, if you could call it that, sat on the 3rd floor of a building that had been under renovation for as long as Lillian could remember. The landlord's promises were as reliable as the heating system, which meant they weren't reliable at all. 2 rooms, 1 bathroom with a door that didn't lock, a kitchen so narrow you couldn't open the refrigerator all the way without hitting the opposite wall. The carpet was brown, though Lillian suspected it hadn't started out that way. The walls were thin enough that she could hear Mrs. Patel arguing with her husband every night at 9 p.m., and Mr. Patterson's television blaring game shows until well past midnight. But the apartment had something most places in their price range didn't. A window. Just one, facing the brick wall of the building next door. But on certain mornings when the sun hit just right, a sliver of golden light would slice through the gap and land on the couch where Lillian did her homework. Those mornings felt like luck. Her mother worked the graveyard shift, cleaning office buildings downtown, the kind of gleaming glass towers where people in pressed suits talked about quarterly reports and never noticed the woman emptying their trash cans at 2 a.m. The shift paid $11.50 an hour, 35 hours a week, because full-time would have required benefits the cleaning company didn't want to provide. After taxes and the bus fare to get there and back, her mother brought home about $380 every 2 weeks. Rent was $850 a month. Lillian had done that math too, even though she didn't want to. Even though knowing the numbers kept her awake some nights, staring at the ceiling, listening to her mother's exhausted breathing from the mattress they shared. The math didn't work. It never worked. But somehow, her mother made it work anyway. She picked up extra hours when she could. She stretched meals until they barely qualified as food. She wore shoes until the soles separated from the leather, then wore them another 6 months anyway. And she never, ever complained. Lillian had learned not to ask for things a long time ago. Not the toy she saw in the store window. Not the new backpack when hers finally tore. Not the field trip permission slip that required a $15 fee. She'd learned to say, "I'm not hungry," when there was only enough for one plate. She'd learned to tell her teacher she'd forgotten her lunch, instead of admitting there wasn't one to forget. She'd learned to make herself small and quiet and easy, because being difficult cost money they didn't have. But she'd also learned something else. She'd learned it from watching her mother. One winter evening, when Lillian was 7, they'd been walking home from the bus stop in the freezing rain. Her mother had been carrying 2 plastic grocery bags in each hand, the day's haul from 3 different dollar stores, piecing together what they needed from wherever the prices were lowest. They'd passed a woman sitting against the side of a closed pharmacy, soaked through, shivering, holding a cardboard sign Lillian couldn't quite read in the dark. Her mother had stopped walking. Lillian had watched, confused, as her mother set down all 4 bags, dug through her purse, and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. The last of her cash until payday, 3 days away. She'd pressed it into the woman's hand. The woman had looked up, stunned. "Are you sure? Stay warm," her mother had said quietly. They'd walked the remaining 4 blocks in silence. That night, they'd eaten rice with butter for dinner. No vegetables, no protein, nothing else in the house to add. Lillian had asked the question carefully, the way children do when they already suspect the answer. "Mama, did you need that money?" Her mother had been quiet for a long moment, stirring the pot on the stove. "Yes," she'd finally said, "but she needed it more. But we don't have enough. We have enough for tonight." She didn't have enough for tonight. Lillian had thought about that for a long time. It didn't make sense, mathematically. You couldn't give away what you didn't have. The numbers didn't work. But her mother had smiled at her across the tiny table, tired and worn and somehow still whole, and said something Lillian would never forget. "Baby, being poor doesn't mean you stop being human. Sometimes the only thing we have left to give is kindness, and if we stop giving that, we've lost more than money." Lillian hadn't fully understood it then, but she'd remembered it. She'd remembered it when kids at school made fun of her worn-out shoes and she'd chosen not to make fun of anyone else's. She'd remembered it when she'd found a wallet in the park with $40 inside and spent 2 hours trying to find the owner instead of keeping it. She'd remembered it every time she had a choice between easy and right. Her mother had taught her that kindness wasn't something you practiced when you could afford it. It was something you practiced especially when you couldn't. The neighborhood they lived in had its own rules, none of them written down. Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact. Don't get involved. Mind your business. And maybe your business won't get minded in return. People walked past suffering like it was part of the landscape. A man passed out in an alley? Not your problem. A woman screaming for help 3 floors up? Close your window. Someone getting beaten behind the liquor store? You didn't see anything. This was survival in a place where caring could get you hurt, where kindness was a liability, where the smartest thing you could do was look away. Lillian had seen it 1,000 times. The way neighbors crossed the street to avoid each other, the way no one answered their door after dark, the way help never came unless you could pay for it. She'd watched people become smaller, harder, colder, and she'd promised herself she wouldn't. Even when it didn't make sense, even when it cost more than she had, which is exactly how she ended up kneeling on a dawn-lit street with her last $5 already spent, holding a water bottle toward a stranger everyone else had abandoned. The young man's hand trembled as he reached for the water bottle. Up close, Lillian could see just how badly he'd been hurt. His left eye was swollen nearly shut, the skin around it already turning that deep purple black that meant the bruising went bone deep. His bottom lip was split, blood dried in a dark line down his chin. When he tried to shift his weight, he sucked in a sharp breath and pressed his hand harder against his ribs. "Broken," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Definitely broken." Lillian held the pills out in her small palm. "These will help. With the pain, I mean." He looked at her then, really looked at her. His eyes were dark blue, even with one half closed. Young, maybe 19 or 20. Despite the bruises and blood, there was something almost gentle in the way he studied her face. "How old are you?" he asked quietly. 9. He closed his eyes. "Jesus, you shouldn't be out here alone." "I'm not alone," Lillian said, though they both knew it wasn't true. "Take the pills, please." He took them from her palm with shaking fingers and swallowed them dry, then reached for the water. He drank in small, painful sips, like even that simple action hurt. Behind them, the morning was waking up properly now. More footsteps on the sidewalk. A car passing with its radio too loud. the metal rattle of Mr. Park pulling up the security gate on his store, and people kept walking past. A man in a construction vest glanced at them, then away, his pace quickening. 2 teenage girls whispered to each other, one pulling out her phone not to call for help, Lillian realized, but to take a picture. An elderly woman with a shopping cart actually stopped, but only to say, "You're wasting your time, little girl. Boys like that, they get what they deserve." Lillian felt her hands curl into fists. "He needs a doctor. He needs to stay away from whatever trouble he got himself into." The woman wheeled her cart away, shaking her head. The young man let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so bitter. "She's not wrong. She is wrong," Lillian said firmly. "You need help. What I need is to not be here when—" He stopped mid-sentence, his gaze snapping to something over Lillian's shoulder. The color drained from his already pale face. "Oh no. No. Lillian turned to look. The man in the black suit was closer now, maybe half a block away. From this distance she could see more details. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of controlled purpose that made people step out of his way without him saying a word. His face was hard, angular, the kind of face that didn't smile often. The tattoos on his hands weren't random, they were deliberate, intricate, crawling up from his knuckles and disappearing under his sleeves. He looked dangerous. He looked like he was supposed to look dangerous. "You have to go," the young man said urgently, trying to push himself up. He gasped and collapsed back against the lamppost. "Kid, seriously, you have to get out of here right now, but you can't even stand." "That doesn't matter," his voice cracked. "When he gets here, you need to be gone, far away from me." "Who is he?" The young man looked at her, and for the first time, Lillian saw something in his eyes that frightened her more than the approaching stranger. Resignation. The look of someone who'd already accepted what was coming. "Someone I disappointed," he said quietly. The man in the black suit was 30 feet away now. 20 feet. Lillian could hear his footsteps on the pavement, steady and unhurried. She should have run. Every instinct her mother had tried to teach her about this neighborhood screamed at her to drop the empty water bottle and go. Get home. Lock the door. Pretend she'd never seen any of this. But she thought about the woman in the rain, the $5 bill her mother couldn't afford to give away. Being poor doesn't mean you stop being human. Lillian stayed where she was, 10 feet away, and she could see the man's face clearly now. Older than she'd thought, maybe 40, with lines around his eyes and gray threading through his dark hair. His expression was completely unreadable, cold, and controlled in a way that made Lillian's stomach twist. 5 feet. The young man beside her was shaking now, whether from pain or fear, Lillian couldn't tell. The man in the black suit stopped directly in front of them. He stood there, silent, looking down at the scene like he was trying to understand a puzzle. His eyes moved from the young man's bruised face to Lillian's small form kneeling beside him, to the empty painkiller packet on the ground. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "Arthur." The young man Arthur flinched at his own name. "I can explain. You were told to stay at the house. I know, but you were told it wasn't safe. I just needed. And now you're bleeding on a public street where anyone could see you?" The man's tone didn't rise, but somehow that made it worse. "Do you have any idea what I've been doing for the last 4 hours? What your mother is going through right now?" Arthur's head dropped. "I'm sorry." The man looked at Lillian then, really looked at her for the first time. His eyes narrowed slightly, taking in her worn jacket, her small hand still holding the water bottle, the grocery bag lying forgotten on the ground behind her. "Who are you?" he asked. Lillian's voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. "Lillian Bailey." "What are you doing here, Lillian Bailey?" She swallowed hard. He needed help. Something flickered across the man's face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. "So you helped him?" "Yes, sir." "With what?" She held up the empty water bottle. "Water and medicine, for the pain." The man was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between Lillian and Arthur. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted into something Lillian couldn't quite identify. "How much did that cost?" $5. "And do you have more than that at home?" Lillian thought about lying. Then she thought about her mother's face when she came home with no bread, no milk, and no explanation that would make sense. "No, sir," she whispered. "That was all we had." The silence that followed felt impossibly heavy. Arthur stared at her, his expression stricken. "Kid, why would you—" "Because nobody else would," Lillian said simply. The man in the black suit crouched down slowly, bringing himself to Lillian's eye level. Up close, She could see that his eyes were the same dark blue as Arthur's, the same shape. "Do you know who I am?" he asked quietly. Lillian shook her head. "Good." He stood back up. "Go home, Lillian Bailey." Lillian didn't move. She knew she should. The man had told her to go home, and everything about him, from his cold eyes to the tattoos that marked him as someone her mother would have pulled her away from, screamed danger. But Arthur was still slumped against the lamppost, barely conscious, and the man standing over them hadn't called for an ambulance or offered any help. He just stood there, radiating quiet fury. "I said go home," the man repeated, his voice flat. "He needs a hospital," Lillian said, surprised by her own boldness. The man's jaw tightened. "That's not your concern, but he's hurt." "Lillian," Arthur's voice was weak, pleading. "Please, just go." She looked at Arthur's face, saw the fear there mixed with something else, shame, maybe, or regret, and finally understood what he was trying to tell her. He wasn't afraid of what the man would do to him. He was afraid of what might happen to her for being there. Lillian stood up slowly, her legs stiff from kneeling on the cold pavement. She picked up the empty grocery bag, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "Okay," she whispered. "I'm going." She took 3 steps away, then stopped and turned back. "Mr. Bailey?" she said to the man, though she had no idea if that was his name. "He tried to leave, to get away. That's why he's hurt, isn't it? Because he tried to leave?" The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "He's your son," Lillian continued quietly, the pieces clicking together. "That's why you're so angry. Not because he's hurt, because he left." The silence stretched between them, heavy and dangerous. Then the man spoke, and his voice was colder than before. "Go. Home. Now." This time, Lillian went. She walked quickly, not quite running, the empty grocery bag swinging from her hand, her heart hammered in her chest. She didn't look back, but she could feel the man's eyes on her until she turned the corner. Jules Hermans watched the little girl disappear around the corner, her worn green jacket blending into the gray morning light. Then he looked down at his son. Arthur was crying now, silent tears running down his bruised face. Not from pain. Jules had seen his son hurt before, had watched him take beatings that would have broken other men. This was something else. "She spent her last $5 on me," Arthur said, his voice breaking. "Did you hear that? Her last $5. Jules said nothing. "A kid. A 9-year-old kid did what 30 other people wouldn't do. They walked right past me, Dad. Every single one of them. But she..." He stopped, pressing his hand against his ribs. "She didn't even hesitate. She was stupid," Jules said flatly. "Reckless. She could have been hurt. She was kind." Arthur looked up at his father with red-rimmed eyes. "When was the last time you saw that? Real kindness? Not loyalty bought with money or fear. Just..." He gestured weakly at the empty water bottle, the painkiller packet. "Just someone helping because they could." Jules picked up the painkiller packet from the ground, studying the generic white box, the cheapest brand in the store. He thought about the little girl's worn jacket, her careful way of speaking, the empty grocery bag. "That was all we had." "She's a child," Jules said, though something in his chest had gone tight. "She doesn't understand the world yet." "Maybe we're the ones who don't understand," Arthur said quietly. "Look at us. Look at what we've become. I tried to leave the family business, and my own people put me in the hospital for it. I'm lying on a street corner at dawn, beaten half to death, and the only person who cared was a little girl who gave away her family's food money." Jules's hands clenched into fists. "You knew the consequences when you walked away." "Yeah, I did." Arthur's laugh was bitter. "I knew that wanting to be something other than a criminal would get me beaten. I knew that trying to go straight meant becoming a target. I knew all of it. And I still thought..." He stopped, closing his eyes. "I still thought maybe I could be better than this. You are my son. I'm your property." Arthur's voice cracked. "There's a difference." Jules felt the words like a physical blow, but his expression remained stone. "You think leaving makes you noble? You think working some minimum wage job and pretending you're not a Hermans changes what you are? It changes what I could be. You're weak." "No, Dad." Arthur looked up at him, and despite the bruises and blood, there was something steady in his gaze. "I'm tired. I'm tired of the violence. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder. I'm tired of knowing that everyone who smiles at me is either afraid or wants something." He gestured at the empty street. "That little girl didn't know who I was. She didn't know about the family or the money or any of it. She just saw someone hurt and helped. She saw a victim. You think that's what you are now? A victim? I think I'm someone who wants to be worth helping. Arthur's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Like she thought I was. Jules stared at his son for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. It's me, he said when someone answered. Send a car to 4th and Morrison. Medical team on standby at the house. He paused. And find out everything about a girl named Lillian Bailey. 9 years old, lives in this neighborhood. Everything where she lives, who her family is, what they need. Arthur's eyes widened. Dad, if she spent her last $5 on you, Jules said, hanging up the phone, then someone needs to make sure she has $5 tomorrow. He looked down at his son with an expression that might have been anger, or might have been something far more complicated. Consider it payment for services rendered. You can't just... I can do whatever I want. Jules's voice went hard again. That's what power means, Arthur. I can't make the world kind, but I can make sure kind people don't starve for it. Within 3 minutes, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. 2 men got out, both in dark suits, both moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. They helped Arthur into the back seat with careful hands, supporting his broken ribs. Jules stood on the sidewalk, watching the car drive away. Then he looked at the corner where the little girl had disappeared, the crumpled painkiller packet still in his hand. That was all we had. He'd built an empire on fear and force, on making people understand that crossing Jules Herman's meant consequences. He'd spent 25 years teaching this city to be afraid of him, and a 9-year-old girl with $5 had just reminded him of something he'd forgotten. Fear wasn't the only kind of power that existed. Lillian's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd made it 3 blocks before her legs finally gave out, and now she sat on the front steps of her building, the empty grocery bag crumpled beside her, trying to figure out how to explain to her mother why she'd come home with nothing. The truth felt impossible. I gave our food money to a bleeding stranger, and then his father, who looked like he could kill someone with his bare hands, told me to leave. Her mother would be terrified, or angry, or both. Lillian pressed her palms against her knees, willing them to stop trembling. The sun was higher now, washing the street in pale morning light. In an hour, her mother would wake up expecting breakfast, expecting the bread and milk Lillian had promised to bring home. She thought about the pills Arthur had swallowed, the way his hand had shaken reaching for the water, the terror in his eyes when he'd seen his father approaching. He tried to leave. That's what she'd said, and the man the father hadn't denied it. Arthur had tried to escape something, and someone had beaten him for it. His own people, he'd said. What kind of life was that? Lillian had never understood her mother's warnings about certain people in the neighborhood. The ones who wore expensive watches and drove cars that cost more than their apartment building. The ones everyone whispered about but never spoke to directly. Now she understood. She picked up the grocery bag and stood on shaky legs. There was no point in delaying. She'd made her choice on that street corner, and now she had to face the consequences. The apartment was quiet when she slipped inside. Her mother was asleep on the couch, still in her work clothes, one arm draped over her eyes to block out the light. Lillian set the empty bag on the kitchen counter and sat down at the small table, waiting. 15 miles across the city, Jules Herman stood in his study, looking at a photograph he kept in his desk drawer but rarely took out. His wife, Caroline, holding newborn Arthur. 20 years ago, before the cancer, before the treatment that failed, before Jules had to explain to a 5-year-old why his mother wasn't coming home anymore. Caroline had been the only person who could soften him, the only one who saw past the reputation and the violence to whatever was left of the man he'd been before power consumed him. You're going to teach him to be strong, she'd said in those final weeks, her voice already fading. But Jules, promise me don't teach him to be cruel. There's a difference, he'd promised. And then she died, and Jules had been left alone to raise a boy in a world that ate kindness alive. So he'd taught Arthur strength, control, how to command respect through fear, how to make hard decisions without flinching. He'd taught him everything except how to be happy. Arthur had tried, in his own way. He'd excelled at the family business, sharp, strategic, capable of the kind of calculated violence the work required. But Jules had watched something dim in his son's eyes over the years. A light going out slowly, like a candle burning down to nothing. 6 months ago, Arthur had asked to leave. Jules had said no. You didn't leave the Hermans family. You were born into it, and you died in it. And everything in between belonged to the empire Jules had built. That was the price of the life they lived. The money, the power, the protection. Arthur had tried to leave anyway. And Jules's own lieutenants, men he'd trusted for decades, had made an example of him. To show what happened to anyone who tried to walk away, even the boss's son, especially the boss's son. Jules had found out 3 hours too late. He'd spent the dawn driving through every neighborhood Arthur might have collapsed in, calling in favors, making threats, tearing through the city with a cold terror he hadn't felt since Caroline's diagnosis. And then he'd found his son on a street corner, kept alive by a 9-year-old girl who'd given away her family's last $5. Jules set the photograph back in the drawer and picked up his phone. "Talk to me," he said when his second-in-command answered. "Lillian Bailey, age 9, the man's voice crackled through. "Lives at 447 Morrison Street, apartment 3C. Mother is Rebecca Bailey, works graveyard shift cleaning offices downtown. Father unknown, not in the picture. They're 2 months behind on rent. Mother's been picking up extra shifts, but the building manager's threatening eviction." Jules closed his eyes. "Go on. Kids' school records show perfect attendance, but she's on the free lunch program. No disciplinary issues. Teachers say she's quiet, keeps to herself. Smart, though, reading 2 grades above her level." A pause. "Boss, they're barely surviving. This month's rent alone would wipe out everything the mother's saved." "What else?" "The building's a dump. Violations going back years. Heat doesn't work half the time. Electrical issues. The whole place should probably be condemned. But it's cheap, so people stay." Jules thought about Arthur's words. A little girl who gave away her family's food money. He'd spent 25 years building power, accumulating wealth, making sure everyone in the city knew that crossing Jules Herman's meant consequences. He'd bought loyalty, purchased protection, ensured that his family would never want for anything, and his son had tried to run away from all of it, while a little girl with nothing had run toward danger to help a stranger. "Sir?" the voice on the phone prompted. "What do you want me to do?" Jules was quiet for a long moment, staring at the closed drawer where his wife's photograph lay hidden. "Don't teach him to be cruel. There's a difference. Send someone to 447 Morrison Street," he finally said, quietly. "I want all their back rent paid. Tell the building manager it's been taken care of. Anonymous donation. I want their utilities paid through the end of the year. And I want a grocery delivery, everything they need. Enough for a month at least." "Anonymous?" "Completely. They don't know where it came from." Jules paused. "And set up a trust. College fund. For the girl. Enough that she won't have to worry about money when she's old enough to use it." Silence on the other end. Then, "Boss, with all due respect, why?" Jules thought about Arthur's broken ribs, about the way he'd cried when he talked about the little girl's kindness, about 20 years of teaching his son to be hard when, maybe, just maybe, he should have taught him to be human. "Because someone needs to make sure kind people don't starve for it," he said quietly. "Sir, I don't—" "Just do it." Jules's voice went hard again, the tone that meant the conversation was over. "And I want updates on the girl. If she needs anything, school supplies, winter clothes, anything, it gets taken care of." Quietly, he hung up before his second could ask more questions. Then Jules did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He went to the corner of his study where a bottle of his wife's favorite whiskey still sat, untouched since the funeral. He poured 2 fingers into a glass and raised it toward the photograph he couldn't see but knew was there. "I'm trying, Caroline," he said to the empty room. "I don't know if it's enough, but I'm trying." The whiskey burned going down. Outside, the sun was fully up now, and somewhere across the city, a little girl was probably trying to explain to her mother why she'd come home with an empty bag and an impossible story. Jules hoped she'd tell the truth. He hoped someone would believe her. And he hoped, though he'd never admitted out loud, that somewhere in all the violence and fear and power he'd accumulated, there was still enough humanity left to recognize kindness when he saw it, even if it came from the smallest, most unlikely source imaginable. Lillian's mother woke up 40 minutes later. She sat up slowly, disoriented, pressing one hand to her lower back. Her uniform was wrinkled, her hair falling out of the ponytail she'd tied 12 hours ago. When she saw Lillian sitting at the kitchen table, she smiled, then saw the empty grocery bag on the counter. The smile faded. "Baby? Where's the bread?" Lillian had practiced the words in her head a dozen times. They still came out wrong. "I helped someone." Her mother stood up, fully awake now. "What?" There was a man, outside the store. He was hurt really bad, and everyone just walked past him. And Lillian's voice cracked. "I bought water and medicine instead. I'm sorry." The color drained from her mother's face. "You approached a stranger? A hurt man?" "Lillian, what were you thinking? He was dying, Mama. I couldn't just—" "Yes, you could." Her mother's voice rose, sharp with fear. "You absolutely could have just walked away. That's exactly what you should have done." She crossed the small space in 3 steps, grabbing Lillian's shoulders. "Did he hurt you? Did he touch you? Did anyone see you with him?" "No, Mama. It wasn't like that." "You don't know what it was like." Her mother's hands were shaking. "You're 9 years old, Lillian. 9. You don't approach strangers. You don't get involved. You especially don't spend our last money on—" She stopped, closing her eyes. "Oh God, our last $5. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't buy breakfast." Her mother let go of Lillian's shoulders and sank into the other chair, her head in her hands. "Sorry doesn't explain to your teachers why you're falling asleep in class because you didn't eat. Sorry doesn't." Her voice broke. "Baby, I work so hard to keep us safe. And you just threw that away for a stranger." Lillian felt tears burning behind her eyes. He needed help. "And what about what we need?" Her mother looked up, and Lillian saw something she'd never seen before in her mother's face. Not just fear, but desperation. "I can't protect you if you don't protect yourself. This neighborhood, these people, they're not kind, Lillian. They're dangerous, and now you've made yourself visible to them." "What do you mean?" Her mother stood up and went to the window, peering through the thin curtains. "If that man was hurt badly enough that he couldn't stand, he was probably into something. Drugs, gangs, I don't know. And now someone saw you with him. Someone knows you helped him." "His father came," Lillian said quietly. "He told me to go home." Her mother spun around. "His father?" He was wearing a suit. He had tattoos on his hands. He looked— Lillian searched for the word. Important. Scary important. The apartment went deadly quiet. Her mother walked back to the table slowly, her face ashen. "Describe him." Lillian did the black suit, the tattoos, the way people had moved out of his path without him saying a word. The cold eyes that had studied her like she was a puzzle. Her mother sat down heavily. Oh God, Lillian. "What? Who was he?" "I don't know exactly, but men like that." She pressed her hands over her mouth. "We have to move. As soon as I can save enough, we have to get out of this neighborhood." "Mama, you're scaring me." "Good." Her mother's voice was sharp. "You should be scared. I should be scared. Those people, Lillian, the ones with the expensive suits and the tattoos and the money, they're not people you help. They're people you avoid. But he was hurt." "I don't care." Her mother slammed her hand on the table, making Lillian jump. "I don't care if he was bleeding out on the street. You walk away. You always walk away." They sat in silence, Lillian crying quietly, her mother staring at the empty grocery bag like it was evidence of a crime. Finally, her mother spoke again, quieter now. "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If you see that man again, the father, you run. You don't talk to him. You don't look at him. You run straight home and you lock this door. Understand?" Lillian nodded, though she didn't really understand at all. "And if anyone asks you about this morning, you say you don't remember. You were half asleep. You got confused. You don't know what they're talking about. Can you do that?" "Yes, Mama." Her mother pulled her into a tight hug, holding her like she might disappear. "I love you so much. You know that, right? Everything I do, every hour I work, every choice I make, it's all for you." "I know." "Then please, baby, please just stay invisible. Stay safe. Let the world be cruel without you trying to fix it." But Lillian had already learned that lesson from her mother. The woman who'd given $5 in the freezing rain to a stranger. The woman who'd taught her that being poor didn't mean you stopped being human. She didn't say that out loud, though. She just held on tighter. The rumors started that afternoon. Mrs. Patel from down the hall mentioned to Mrs. Patterson that she'd seen a little girl kneeling on the street that morning. Mrs. Patterson told the building manager, who told the corner store owner, who told the retired cop who bought coffee there every day. By evening, half the neighborhood knew that Lillian Bailey had been seen with someone connected to those people, the organized crime families that operated in the shadows of the city. By the next morning, things had changed. People who used to smile at Lillian on her way to school now crossed the street to avoid her. Mothers pulled their children closer when she walked past. The teacher who usually greeted her warmly at the classroom door barely made eye contact. At lunch, no one sat near her. At recess, she played alone. On the walk home, someone threw a rock that missed her head by inches, She heard the word rat hissed from an alley, though she couldn't see who said it. When she finally made it home, her mother was already there, sent home early from work, because someone had called the cleaning company and suggested they might want to reconsider employing Rebecca Bailey. They didn't say why. They didn't have to. Her mother sat on the couch, holding an envelope that Lillian recognized as the eviction warning they'd received 2 weeks ago, and cried silently. "Mama, we're going to be okay," her mother said, though her voice said otherwise. "We'll figure something out. We always do." But that night, Lillian lay awake listening to her mother make phone calls to relatives who didn't answer, to shelters that had no space, to churches that took her name and promised nothing. And for the first time since kneeling on that street corner, Lillian wondered if her mother had been right. Maybe kindness was a luxury they couldn't afford. Maybe in a world this cruel, trying to be good just meant you suffered more. She thought about Arthur's bruised face, his father's cold eyes, the $5 that might have been the difference between staying in their home and losing it. Outside, a car with dark windows drove slowly past their building, then another, then a third. Lillian pulled the thin blanket over her head and tried not to think about what came next. 3 days later, the black cars came. Lillian was walking home from school alone now, always alone when she first noticed them. 4 black sedans, the expensive kind with tinted windows and chrome that gleamed even under the gray afternoon sky, moving slowly down Morrison Street, like a funeral procession. Her stomach dropped. She'd seen cars like that before in the neighborhood, but never this many at once. Never moving with such deliberate purpose. They didn't speed or weave through traffic. They simply moved forward, and everything else got out of their way. Lillian's first instinct was to run. Her mother's words echoed in her head. "If you see that man again, you run." But her legs wouldn't move. The cars turned onto her street. People on the sidewalk stopped walking. Someone pulled their child into a doorway. Mr. Park, setting up his produce stand, froze with a box of oranges in his hands. The cars came to a stop directly in front of Lillian's building. "Oh no," someone whispered. "Oh God, no." Doors opened in perfect synchronization. Men in dark suits stepped out. 6 of them, then 8, then 10. They moved with the kind of military precision that made it clear they'd done this before. They fanned out, creating a perimeter around the building entrance. And then the door of the lead car opened. Jules Herman stepped out. He was dressed exactly as he'd been that morning, black suit. No tie, tattoos visible on his hands and neck. But something was different about him now. In the dawn light, he'd looked angry, controlled. Now he looked almost calm, resolved. Lillian's heart hammered against her ribs. The street had gone completely silent. Even the traffic seemed to quiet, as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Jules looked around slowly, taking in the crowd that was forming at a careful distance. Then his eyes found Lillian, standing frozen on the sidewalk 30 feet away, her backpack hanging from one shoulder. Their eyes met. Lillian waited for him to be angry, to yell at her for not leaving fast enough that morning, to blame her for something she didn't understand. Instead, he did something she didn't expect. He nodded at her, just once, a small acknowledgement that somehow felt like permission. Then he turned and walked toward her building. Inside apartment 3C, Rebecca Bailey was packing. She'd spent the last 3 days trying to figure out where they'd go, how they'd survive, what she'd tell Lillian when the eviction became official next week. She'd sold everything they could spare: her good winter coat, the small television, even the necklace Lillian's grandmother had given her before she passed. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. She was folding Lillian's clothes into a garbage bag they didn't own suitcases when she heard the footsteps in the hallway. Heavy. Multiple sets. Moving with purpose. Her blood went cold. Someone knocked on the door. 3 sharp raps that didn't sound like a question. They sounded like a command. Rebecca stood frozen, a child's t-shirt clutched in her shaking hands. Another knock. Harder this time. "Miss Bailey?" a male voice called through the door. "We need to speak with you. It's about your daughter, Lillian." Rebecca dropped the shirt and ran to the door, yanking it open without thinking, without checking, because if something had happened to her daughter, nothing else mattered. 2 men in suits stood in the hallway. Behind them, she could see more, at least 6. Maybe more. Creating a wall of dark fabric and hard faces. "Where's Lillian?" Rebecca demanded, her voice cracking. "What did you do? If you hurt her, I swear." "Your daughter is fine," one of the men said calmly. "She's downstairs. Mr. Hermans would like to speak with you. Both of you. I'm not going anywhere with, it's not a request. But the man's tone wasn't threatening. It was almost respectful, careful. Rebecca's mind raced. She could slam the door, lock it, call the police. But what good would that do? The police didn't come to this neighborhood unless they had to. And men like these, they didn't knock politely and wait for permission. "Let me get my shoes," she finally said, her voice barely steady. The man nodded and stepped back. Rebecca shoved her feet into her worn sneakers and followed them down the stairs, her heart in her throat. When she emerged onto the street, she understood why everything had gone so quiet. The entire block was lined with people, neighbors, shopkeepers, strangers who'd been drawn by the spectacle. They stood at a distance, watching with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. The black cars surrounded her building like a barricade, and in the center of it all, Jules Hermans stood waiting. Rebecca's eyes found Lillian immediately. Her daughter stood near the building entrance, looking small and scared but unharmed. Rebecca rushed to her, pulling her close. "Did they hurt you?" "No, Mama. They just asked me to wait." Jules approached slowly, his hands visible at his sides. Non-threatening, though everything about him was a threat. "Miss Bailey," he said quietly. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but I needed to make sure we weren't interrupted." "What do you want?" Rebecca held Lillian tighter. "To thank your daughter." Jules's voice carried across the silent street, loud enough for everyone watching to hear. "3 days ago, she saved my son's life." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Rebecca stared at him. "What?" "Arthur Hermans, the young man your daughter found bleeding on the street." Jules looked down at Lillian. She spent her last $5 buying him water and medicine when everyone else walked away. She stayed with him even when she was afraid. She showed him kindness when he deserved none. The crowd was growing larger now, people emerging from buildings and shops, drawn by whatever was happening. "I don't understand," Rebecca said. "Why are you here?" Jules reached into his jacket slowly, carefully, making sure everyone could see he was just retrieving something from his pocket. He pulled out an envelope. "Because I wanted everyone in this neighborhood to know the truth," he said, loud enough for all of them to hear. "For 3 days you've treated this family like criminals. You've avoided them, judged them, made them feel unsafe in their own home." His voice went hard. "Because you assumed helping someone made them guilty of something." He held out the envelope to Rebecca. "Your daughter did what most adults refuse to do. She saw someone suffering and she helped. No questions, no judgment, no fear." Jules looked around at the watching crowd. "She's 9 years old, and she has more courage than any of you." Rebecca took the envelope with shaking hands, not opening it. Jules turned to face the crowd directly. "My son is alive because of Lillian Bailey, and anyone who treats her or her mother with anything less than respect from this moment forward will answer to me personally. Is that clear?" The silence was deafening. Then Jules did something no one expected. He knelt down in front of Lillian, the dangerous man who made the city afraid, the crime boss who operated in shadows and violence. He knelt on the dirty sidewalk in his expensive suit and looked a 9-year-old girl in the eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saving my son, for being brave when you shouldn't have had to be, for being kind in a world that punishes it." Lillian's voice was small. "Is he okay? Arthur?" Something flickered across Jules's face. Surprise, maybe? Or something softer. "He's recovering. Thanks to you. I'm glad." Jules stood slowly. He looked at Rebecca again. "Open the envelope when we leave. And if you need anything else, anything at all, my people know how to reach me." He turned to go, his men falling into formation around him. "Wait," Lillian called out. Jules stopped. "Tell Arthur I hope he gets to leave," she said. "For real this time. Tell him he deserves to be happy." Jules stood very still for a moment, his back to them. Then he nodded once and walked to his car. The black sedans pulled away as smoothly as they'd arrived, leaving behind a street full of stunned witnesses and a little girl who'd just been publicly defended by one of the most dangerous men in the city. Rebecca looked down at the envelope in her hands, almost afraid to open it. When she finally did, she had to sit down on the curb. Inside was a cashier's check enough to cover 6 months of rent, and a note, written in careful handwriting, "Kindness should never be punished. J.H." Rebecca Bailey sat on the curb, staring at the check in her trembling hands, while Lillian stood beside her trying to understand what was happening. 6 months of rent. The number didn't make sense. It was more money than her mother made in 3 months of overnight cleaning shifts. More money than they'd ever had at one time in their entire lives. "Mama?" Lillian touched her mother's shoulder. "What does it say?" Rebecca couldn't speak. She just held out the check with shaking hands. Lillian looked at the numbers, counted the zeros twice, and felt her own legs go weak. "Is this real?" Before Rebecca could answer, one of the black sedans that had been pulling away stopped and reversed. The back door opened, and a figure stepped out carefully. One hand pressed against his ribs. Arthur Herman's. He looked better than he had 3 days ago. The swelling in his face had gone down. The worst of the bruising had faded to yellow-green. But he still moved like every step hurt, and when he walked toward them, Lillian could see the careful way he held himself. The crowd that had started to disperse froze again, watching. Arthur stopped a respectful distance away, his hands visible, non-threatening. "Miss Bailey," he said to Rebecca, "may I speak with you and your daughter?" Rebecca stood up slowly, positioning herself protectively in front of Lillian. "Haven't you people done enough?" "No," Arthur said quietly. "We haven't done nearly enough." He reached into his jacket, the same careful movement his father had made, and pulled out another envelope. This one was thicker, heavier. "The check my father gave you covers your rent," Arthur said. "This covers everything else." Rebecca didn't take it. "I don't want your money. I know." Arthur's voice was gentle. "But your daughter gave me her last $5 when she didn't have to. When she shouldn't have. When every adult on this street told her not to." He looked down at Lillian. "She saved my life. And I need to make sure that choice doesn't ruin hers. We don't need charity." "It's not charity." Arthur held out the envelope more firmly. "It's payment. For services rendered. For medicine and water that kept me alive until help came. For courage I didn't deserve but received anyway." Rebecca's hands stayed at her sides, but Lillian could see her mother's resolve wavering. "Inside this envelope," Arthur continued, "is payment for all your past due utilities. Your electricity, your heat, your water. Everything you've been choosing not to pay because you needed to eat instead." His voice cracked slightly. "I know what that's like now, making impossible choices. And I know your daughter made one that cost your family everything." "She made it because I taught her to," Rebecca said, her voice tight. "I taught her that you help people who are hurting, even when you can't afford to, even when it costs you." "I know." Arthur looked at her with something like reverence. "My mother taught me the same thing, before she died, before I forgot." He paused. "Your daughter reminded me what that lesson meant." He set the envelope on the building's front step, then pulled out a third item, a single folded paper. "This is information for a trust fund," he said. "It's been set up in Lillian's name. She can't access it until she turns 18, but when she does, there will be enough for college, for whatever she wants to become. So that being kind at 9 years old doesn't mean being poor at 19. Rebecca's face crumpled. "Why are you doing this?" Arthur was quiet for a long moment, his hand still pressed against his broken ribs. When he spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. "Because 30 people walked past me that morning," he said. 30 people saw me bleeding on that street and decided I wasn't worth helping. They saw someone in trouble, and they made the smart choice. They protected themselves. They kept their money, and their safety, and their distance." He looked directly at Lillian. "But you didn't. You saw someone suffering and you ran toward it. You gave away everything you had to help a stranger everyone said was trouble." His voice broke. "Do you know how rare that is? Do you understand what you did?" Lillian shook her head, suddenly crying. "You proved that kindness still exists," Arthur said. "In a world that beats it out of people, in a neighborhood that punishes it, in a life that makes it nearly impossible, you chose it anyway. You chose to be good when being good cost you everything." He knelt down slowly, wincing as his ribs protested, bringing himself to Lillian's eye level the same way his father had. "I'm sorry," he said, and tears were running down his face now too. "I'm so sorry that helping me made your life harder. I'm sorry people treated you like you'd done something wrong. I'm sorry you had to learn that the world punishes kindness." "It's okay," Lillian whispered. "No, it's not," Arthur shook his head. "It's not okay. None of this is okay. But I'm going to try. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make sure that what you did wasn't for nothing." He stood up carefully and addressed the crowd that had gathered closer now, unable to resist the spectacle. "You all need to hear this," Arthur said, his voice growing stronger. "This little girl showed me something I'd forgotten. She showed me that power isn't about fear or money or control. It's about making the choice to help when no one's forcing you to, when there's no reward, when it costs you. He looked at the faces, watching neighbors who'd avoided Lillian, shopkeepers who'd turned away, parents who'd pulled their children from her path. "You walked past me," Arthur said simply. "Every one of you. And I don't blame you, I probably deserved it. But she didn't walk past. She stopped, and that choice is worth more than anything my family's money can buy." The street was silent except for someone crying quietly in the back of the crowd. Arthur turned back to Rebecca. "I can't undo what happened. I can't make people treat you differently, though my father will make sure they think twice about treating you badly. But I can make sure that your daughter's kindness doesn't leave you homeless, that her courage doesn't mean you go hungry, that her goodness doesn't destroy your life." Rebecca picked up the envelopes from the step with shaking hands. She opened the second one, saw the payment confirmations for utilities she'd thought they'd lose, and covered her mouth with her hand. "There's one more thing," Arthur said quietly. He pulled out a business card and handed it to Rebecca. "My father is starting a foundation, here, in this neighborhood. Food programs, after-school care, safe routes home for kids, help for families who are barely surviving." He glanced at Lillian. "We're calling it the Caroline Hermans Foundation, after my mother. But honestly, it should be called the Lillian Bailey Foundation, because she's the one who reminded us what matters." Rebecca stared at the card. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because we need someone to run it," Arthur said. "Someone who understands what it's like to choose between rent and food. Someone who knows this neighborhood. Someone who raised a daughter brave enough to help a stranger with her last $5. Rebecca's eyes widened. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to help other families like yours. A real salary. Benefits. Enough that you never have to choose between keeping Lillian safe and keeping her fed." Arthur's voice softened. "You taught your daughter to be kind in a cruel world. We need that. This neighborhood needs that." Rebecca looked down at Lillian, then at the envelopes in her hands, then at Arthur's bruised but earnest face. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," Arthur said. "Say you'll let your daughter's kindness mean something more than one saved life. Say you'll help us make this neighborhood a place where helping people doesn't get you punished." Rebecca nodded slowly, unable to speak. Arthur smiled, the first real smile Lillian had seen on his face. "Thank you," he said. "Both of you, for everything." He walked back to the waiting car, moving carefully, and the black sedan pulled away. The crowd remained, stunned into silence. Then slowly, one by one, neighbors began to approach. Mrs. Patel from down the hall, tears streaming down her weathered face. Mr. Park from the corner store, carrying a bag of groceries. The teacher who'd avoided Lillian at school, shame written across her features. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Patel said, taking Rebecca's hand. "I'm so sorry we treated you that way." "We were wrong," Mr. Park added, pressing the grocery bag into Lillian's arms. "So wrong." The teacher knelt down in front of Lillian. "You're the bravest person I know, and I should have told you that 3 days ago." One by one, the neighborhood that had shunned them came forward to apologize, to acknowledge what Lillian had done, to admit their own fear and shame. And Rebecca Bailey, holding 3 envelopes that meant her daughter wouldn't go hungry anymore, finally let herself cry. The Caroline Hermans Foundation opened its doors 6 weeks after that moment on Morrison Street, in a converted warehouse that had once stored stolen goods for one of Jules Hermans's operations. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Arthur stood in the center of the space, watching contractors install the last of the kitchen equipment, and tried to remember the last time he'd felt this kind of purpose. Not the hollow satisfaction of completing a job for his father's empire, not the adrenaline rush of violence and control, but genuine purpose, the kind that made you want to wake up in the morning. "The food delivery arrives at 7, Rebecca Bailey said, consulting the clipboard she now carried everywhere. She'd accepted the position of director 3 weeks ago, after spending 2 weeks asking every question she could think of, making sure this wasn't some elaborate trap or game. It wasn't. Jules Hermans had committed $2 million to the foundation's first year of operation, with promises of more if they proved they could make a real difference. He'd made it clear through his network that the foundation was untouchable. Anyone who tried to interfere with it, steal from it, or threaten its work would answer to him personally. Fear in service of kindness. It was the strangest thing Arthur had ever witnessed his father do. "The volunteers start orientation at 8, Rebecca continued. "We have 12 so far, all locals, all people who know the neighborhood. Mrs. Patel is teaching a cooking class on Thursdays. Mr. Park is donating produce twice a week. Arthur smiled. The same people who wouldn't look at you a month ago. People change when they're given the chance, Rebecca said simply. And when they see someone powerful choosing mercy instead of revenge, she was right. Jules Hermans's public defense of Lillian had sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. People who'd lived in fear for years suddenly understood that the man with the most power had chosen to use it, protecting a 9-year-old girl who'd shown kindness. It had changed the calculus of survival in ways Arthur was still trying to understand. Is she coming today? Arthur asked. Rebecca nodded. After school. She wanted to see it before we open tomorrow. Arthur felt nervous, though he couldn't quite say why. Lillian had visited the site twice during construction, offering quiet suggestions about where things should go, what colors would feel welcoming, whether the chairs were comfortable enough for smaller children. She'd been shy both times, speaking only when spoken to, and Arthur had seen the weight she carried, the burden of being the girl everyone talked about, the child who'd changed everything by doing something impossibly simple. The door opened at 3:45, and Lillian walked in carrying her backpack, her mother beside her. She stopped just inside the entrance, her eyes going wide. The warehouse had been transformed. Bright paint covered walls that had been grimy and dark. Industrial lights had been replaced with warm, gentle fixtures. The concrete floor was covered with colorful rugs. One corner held a full kitchen with commercial equipment. Another held tables and chairs for communal meals. A third was set up as a homework area with desks and bookshelves. The fourth was dedicated to play soft mats, age-appropriate toys, beanbag chairs for reading. What do you think? Arthur asked quietly. Lillian walked through the space slowly, touching things gently like she was afraid they might disappear. She ran her fingers along the bookshelf spines, tested the softness of a beanbag chair, stood in front of the kitchen and just stared. It's beautiful, she finally whispered. Your mother designed most of it, Arthur said. But we followed your suggestions too. The reading corner was your idea. Lillian looked at the cozy space with its pillows and soft lighting and children's books arranged by reading level. Really? Really. Arthur walked over to stand beside her. You said kids need a place where they can disappear into stories, where they can forget about being hungry or scared for a little while. Lillian nodded slowly. Sometimes that's the only thing that helps. Arthur felt something crack in his chest. This 9-year-old child understood survival in ways he'd only recently learned. She'd lived with the weight of poverty and fear and impossible choices, and somehow she'd still found room for kindness. There's something else I want to show you, Arthur said. Come here. He led her to the entrance, where a bronze plaque had been mounted beside the door that morning. Lillian read it aloud, her voice getting quieter with each word. The Caroline Hermans Foundation, established in memory of Caroline Hermans, who believed that kindness was not a weakness, but a choice, and in honor of Lillian Bailey, who proved her right. Lillian looked up at Arthur with tears in her eyes. You didn't have to do that. Yes, we did. Arthur crouched down to her eye level. Do you know why? She shook her head. Because 50 years from now, when you and I are gone, this building will still be here, and people will walk past this plaque and they'll ask who Lillian Bailey was. And someone will tell them. She was a little girl who spent her last $5 saving a stranger's life. She was 9 years old and she changed everything. I didn't change everything, Lillian said quietly. I just helped one person. You helped one person, Arthur agreed. And that person was the son of Jules Hermans. And that started a chain reaction that led to this. He gestured at the space around them. 200 kids a day will eat here. 50 families a week will get help with rent or utilities or medical bills. 100 children will have a safe place to go after school instead of empty apartments or dangerous streets. He put his hand gently on Lillian's shoulder. You saved one person, and that person is trying to save hundreds. That's how kindness works. It multiplies. It spreads. One small act becomes something larger than you ever imagined. His voice caught. You taught me that. You taught my father that. And now we're going to spend the rest of our lives making sure other people learn it too. Lillian wiped her eyes. Is your father coming tomorrow? For the opening? Arthur hesitated. He'll be here, but not publicly. He wants this to be about the neighborhood, not about him. He'll watch from a distance. That's sad, Lillian said. He should get to see what he's done. He knows what he's done, Arthur said. And that's enough for him. It wasn't quite true Jules Hermans struggled daily with the contradiction of building something good with money earned through violence and fear. But he came to the foundation site, most evenings after dark, walking through the empty space, touching the walls, reading the books on the shelves. Arthur had found him there 3 nights ago, standing in front of the plaque, one hand pressed against the bronze letters of his wife's name. She would have liked this, Jules had said quietly. She would have loved it, Arthur had corrected. I'm not a good man, Arthur. This doesn't change that. No, Arthur had agreed. But it's a start. It's a choice to be better. And maybe that's what matters. Jules had left without another word, but Arthur had noticed something different in his father's posture, less rigid, less guarded. Like maybe, just maybe, he was learning to carry something other than fear. Now, watching Lillian trace the letters of her own name on the plaque, Arthur felt that same shift happening inside himself. He'd spent 20 years learning how to hurt people, how to control them, how to make them afraid. Learning how to help them was infinitely harder, but it was also the only thing that had made him feel human in years. Thank you, Lillian said suddenly, looking up at him. For this. For everything. For not being mad that I helped you. Arthur laughed, the sound surprising him. Mad? Lillian, you're the only reason I'm still alive. I should be thanking you every day for the rest of my life. You already did, she said simply. You built this. Rebecca approached, touching her daughter's shoulder. We should let Arthur finish preparing for tomorrow. But before they could leave, Arthur said, Wait, one more thing. He walked to the kitchen area and returned with a small frame. Inside was a $5 bill, carefully preserved and mounted, with a small plaque beneath it. The first donation to the Caroline Hermans Foundation, given by Lillian Bailey, age 9. Value. Everything. Lillian stared at it. Is that the actual $5? Arthur smiled. No, your mother needed that for groceries. But it represents what you gave. And it'll hang in the foundation office forever, reminding everyone who works here why we do this. He hung it on the wall beside the entrance plaque, where the evening light caught the bill and made it shine like something precious. Which, Arthur thought, it was. The foundation's opening day arrived with perfect spring weather, the kind of morning that made even Morrison Street look almost beautiful. The line of families waiting outside wrapped around the block, parents holding children's hands, elderly residents leaning on canes, teenagers who'd heard about the free breakfast and showed up skeptical but hungry. Inside, volunteers bustled around making final preparations. Mrs. Patel supervised the kitchen, where eggs scrambled in industrial pans and fresh bread waited to be sliced. Mr. Park arranged donated produce in bins near the entrance free for anyone who needed it. Teachers who'd volunteered their time set up the homework area. Local teenagers who'd completed Arthur's youth employment program wore matching t-shirts and helped organize the space. Rebecca stood in the center of it all, her clipboard forgotten in her hands, watching her neighborhood transform into something she'd never dared to hope for. A community. Ready? Arthur asked, walking up beside her. Terrified, Rebecca admitted. What if no one comes? What if we can't help enough people? What if... Rebecca. Arthur smiled. There are 200 people waiting outside, and tomorrow there will be more. And the day after that, even more. We can't help everyone, but we can help someone, and that someone will help someone else. That's how it works. She nodded, taking a deep breath. Okay, let's open the doors. Arthur unlocked the entrance, and the first family walked in, a young mother with 3 children under 6, all of them with the same hollow-eyed look of people who'd gone to bed hungry. The youngest child, maybe 4 years old, saw the food and started crying. It's okay, baby, the mother said, her own voice breaking. It's okay, we can eat today. Mrs. Patel appeared with plates already prepared, pressing them into the mother's hands. Sit, eat, there's plenty. And there was. For 3 hours, the foundation served breakfast to anyone who came through the doors. No questions asked, no judgments made, no forms to fill out or hoops to jump through. Just food and warmth and the simple acknowledgement that everyone deserved to eat. Lillian arrived at 9 o'clock, after Rebecca had called her school to explain she'd be late. She stood in the doorway watching families eat together. Children laughing, volunteers moving between tables, refilling coffee and juice. Arthur saw her and walked over. What do you think? I think my $5 turned into something big, Lillian said quietly. It did, Arthur agreed. It really did. A man approached them, mid-30s, worn jacket, nervous hands. Excuse me, are you Arthur Hermans? Arthur tensed slightly, old instincts kicking in. I am. I just wanted to say. The man's voice wavered. My kids haven't had a real breakfast in 3 weeks, and today they ate until they were full, so thank you. Just, thank you. He walked away before Arthur could respond, leaving Arthur standing there with tears in his eyes. That's going to happen a lot, Lillian said wisely. People thanking you. I'm not used to being thanked, Arthur admitted. In my family's business, people usually run away when they see me coming. Maybe this can be your business now, Lillian suggested. The thank you business, instead of the fear business. Arthur laughed, and it felt good. The thank you business. I like that. Outside, a black car pulled up to the curb but didn't park. Through the tinted window, Arthur could just make out his father's silhouette watching the crowd of people flowing in and out of the foundation entrance. Jules didn't come inside. He never came inside during operating hours. But Arthur knew he came at night, walking through the quiet space, touching the walls they'd painted, reading the mission statement they'd mounted by the door. Last week, Arthur had found a handwritten note on his desk at the foundation office, just 2 lines in his father's precise handwriting. Your mother would be proud. I am learning to be. Arthur had folded it carefully and put it in his wallet, where he carried it every day. The morning continued, organized chaos of feeding and helping, and connecting people with resources they needed. The homework area filled with children. The job board on the wall collected new postings. The community bulletin became covered with notices about apartment openings, furniture donations, volunteer opportunities. Around noon, as the breakfast rush finally slowed, Arthur found Lillian sitting in the reading corner with a picture book, reading aloud to 3 younger children who'd gathered around her like she was the Pied Piper. He sat down quietly on the edge of the space, just listening. Lillian read with expression and patience, stopping to show the pictures, asking the children questions about the story. She looked completely natural doing it, like she'd been teaching forever instead of being just 9 years old herself. When the story finished, the children ran off to play, and Lillian looked up to find Arthur watching. You're good with them, he said. I like reading, Lillian said simply, and I remember what it's like to be scared and hungry and wanting to disappear into a story. Do you still feel that way? Arthur asked gently. Lillian thought about it. Sometimes, but less now. Now I mostly feel. She searched for the word. Hopeful, I guess. Like maybe things can be better. They can be, Arthur said. They are better. Because of you. Not just me, Lillian corrected. Because of lots of people making good choices. You, your dad, my mom, Mrs. Patel and Mr. Park. Everyone who decided to help instead of hurt. She was right, of course. Change wasn't one person or one moment. It was accumulated choices, small acts of courage building on each other until they became something larger. Can I tell you something? Arthur asked. Lillian nodded. That morning on the street when you gave me the water and the pills, I'd been thinking about giving up. Just letting myself die on that curb because I was so tired of trying to be better when the world kept punishing me for it. His voice caught. And then you showed up. This tiny person with barely anything to her name, and you gave me everything you had. He paused, collecting himself. You saved my life in more ways than one, Lillian. You reminded me why it was worth saving, why fighting to be good matters even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Lillian reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded $5 bill. Want to know a secret? Arthur nodded. I keep this with me all the time now. Not because I need it, we have money now, enough for groceries and rent and everything, but because it reminds me. She held up the crisp bill. It reminds me that $5 can change the world if you use it right. That small things matter. That what you do when nobody's watching is who you really are. Arthur felt his throat tighten. Where did you get that one? Your dad, Lillian said. He gave it to me the day after the foundation opened. He said every hero should have a $5 bill in their pocket, just in case they need to save someone. Arthur had to look away, blinking hard. Of course his father had done that. Jules Hermans, the man who'd built an empire on fear and violence, had given a 9-year-old girl a $5 bill as a reminder that kindness was worth more than power. Maybe people really could change. What will you do with it? Arthur asked when he could speak again. Lillian folded the bill carefully and put it back in her pocket. I'll keep it, until I find someone who needs it more than I do. And then I'll do what my mom taught me. I'll help them, even if it costs me everything. Because that's what it means to be human. She stood up and grabbed another book from the shelf. There are more kids who want stories. Will you read with me? You're good at the funny voices. Arthur smiled and accepted the book she handed him. I'd be honored. They read together in the corner of the foundation named after his mother, built with money from his father's empire, serving a neighborhood that had learned to be afraid and was now learning to hope. Outside, the black car finally pulled away from the curb. Inside, children laughed and ate, and felt safe for the first time in longer than they could remember. And in her pocket, Lillian Bailey carried a $5 bill, a reminder that the smallest acts of kindness could stop the darkest men in their tracks, could change the trajectory of violence into something resembling grace, could prove that even in a cruel world, goodness still mattered, still multiplied, still saved lives, one small choice at a time. Thanks for sticking with this story. Until the very end, you're the reason these stories feel alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to read your thoughts and connect with you in the comments.